Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Zenphi webinar. I'm really excited about this webinar, mainly because we have a really great guest on the webinar. But before we get started, I want to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. Please note that the session is being recorded and the recording will be available to you shortly after the webinar. And throughout the webinar, if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. We do our best to respond to your question. If you don't get to respond to them, we'll respond after the webinar through an email. Now, today's webinar is around the future of AI in low-code and no-code platforms. My name is Vahid Talimi. I'm the founder and CEO at Zenphi, and I'm extremely excited to have our guest today, Ryan Duguid, who is a good friend of mine. I've known Ryan for a long time. I do reach out to him for anything around low code, no code platforms, their own product. He's a great advisor to Zenphi. He's an investor to Zenphi, and he's a visionary in the no code, low code domain in general. Without further ado, let me invite Ryan to the stage.
It's about time we got around to doing this. I think we've been talking about it long enough, so it's fantastic to have a chance to meet up on stage and talk about something that I think is top of mind for the entire industry right now, as everyone scrambles to figure out their AI strategy and looks to deliver some crowd-pleasing capabilities to help the customers understand directionally where they're all headed.
Yeah, no, Ryan, thank you very much for carving out the time and doing this. I mean, we have these conversations through our meetings that we have. I always, I walk away with a lot of learnings from the conversations with you. As you said, it was about time to open it up and share our conversation with a wider audience, and hopefully it can be useful for our audience as well. But before I get started, Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself to the people who may not know you?
They might be confused. They're looking at the picture on the screen right now. It says I'm a veteran, and I kind of look like one, but then I trimmed my hair post-COVID, and so it's a little different. So I guess my background, I've been in the low-code space for a long time. In fact, I can actually trace the roots back to what we would call rapid application development back in the day, in the early days of drag and drop application creation with tools like Visual Basic and Delphi and the likes. And then carrying on that journey, it's obviously I'm a trained software developer by profession. I think that's relevant to the conversation. We'll actually get into that a bit. How all this plays into the world of pro dev, not just for makers or creators or citizen developers and the likes. But on that journey, I ended up in Microsoft working on what I think, controversially, some might say on SharePoint, which actually I think is one of the largest, most successful low-code platforms in history so far, and with tools around it like SharePoint Designer and InfoPath. And then through that really got me connected with folks you and I know really well, the original crew at Nintex, Brian and Steve Heaney. And that led me down a path that jumped on the same bus that you were on, as we started to take Nintex from being that SharePoint on-premise company to being a dominant force in the world of a cloud workflow. From there, I took a little bit of a break and then found myself back in the industry again with QuickBase, where I spent a couple of years working on their product vision strategy. And then along the way, consulting, advising to other players in the industry. And obviously, I was excited to see when Zenphi popped out from incubation and took the chance to jump on board. And as you mentioned, an advisory and investing capacity, sort of chance to put my money where my mouth is and really help push the future of the industry through more creative thinking about where all this technology can go.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ryan. I, for one, do consider myself lucky to have you around me as an advisor, as a sounding board, and I genuinely consider myself lucky. So, well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for being close to Zenphi. Now, today we'll be talking about the future of AI in low-code and no-code platforms. So I'm going to stop sharing because it's going to be a free-form conversation. Let me find the stop sharing button. Here it is. So I think it's only good if we start talking about the low-code, no-code platforms in general. From your point of view, right, what are low-code, no-code platforms, and what are we trying to achieve using them?
Sure, it's one of those age-old questions. It's surprising we didn't start with what's the difference between low and no code, and I think everyone, including myself, have beaten that one up on various podcasts and webinars, right? But I think at the end of the day, and it's why I think that the low no code is a bit of a moot point, right? What we're really trying to do is help more and more people solve more and more business problems in less time than ever before without having to have expertise and knowledge in how to program computers, right? And so at the end of the day, what we've been focused on as an industry for several decades now is around the build part of that. So how do I help you, when you wake up and say, I've got a problem in my business, maybe it's a process problem, maybe it's some problem around data capture or analytics or the likes. And most people's mind goes to, I need some kind of app to address this problem. I need some kind of process automation to improve my efficiency and effectiveness. And so from there, you get into creator mode, right? So you start with a blank canvas and you start pulling together an application. Now, if you're doing code, you start writing lines of code. In a minute, we'll come back to what happens before that, what happens after that. But you'll start coding an application up off of a set of business requirements. In the world of low code, it's more of a drag and drop exercise, right? So how do I drag and drop a UI form? How do I automate a process? How do I integrate with other systems? And so what we're focused on is making that pretty straightforward to build something, put it out in production. And then I think more importantly, and a lot of people miss this, is put an infrastructure around it that helps provide like a consistent UI for people working with multiple apps on the same platform, consistent security model so we can make sure that there's not data leakage and bits and pieces like that happening. And then more importantly, is like an easy way to adapt those applications over time, right? Because one of the beauties I think of low-code platforms is less about the initial build. It's more about how you tweak and chew things as time goes by and your business needs and requirements either unfold more than when you started or change due to the environment around you. So that's sort of like, that's my high level, what it's all been about. And obviously like that's a journey you and I have been on together for quite some time, right? And so I think, I to throw that back and go, like, does that gel, right? And what's interesting, I mean, the question back to you is probably, so Zenphi's roots are in process. So how do you think about sort of, app versus process, and is there a crossover here?
Yeah, there's I said that's a very good question. Definitely, there's a crossover there. So there's in order to be able to address this end to end, there's different aspects you can attack the problem from. We've attacked it from the process space. We're process heavy and surfacing it through through apps and the UIs and all these other components. I know the other vendors have started attacking the problem from the application side of it, focusing a lot more on app building side of it, and then transition potentially to the process side of it. At the end of the day, we've been discussing a lot. You need the crossover of all those things. I'm going to coach you. The old application building. You need the front end, back end, database. All those things.
Right.
It's the same concept. So what we started if we started attacking it from the back end, the logic part of it, and expanding to providing the interface as well as the database through tables. So different ways of approaching it.
I think that's an interesting thing, right? So like I often get asked that sort of to define the landscape for people, whether it's I did quite a bit of work with private equity companies and venture capital companies, and they're always trying to understand how do you define the market, right? And in the market this complex because everybody says, hey, we're low code now, right? Everybody says we improve workflow. So everything from a Basecamp, Asana, a Trello, Smartsheet would say we do workflow. And I know historically, and you and I would be like, what? Like, no, you don't, right? But they do, right? It's like workflow, and everyone talks about their workflows now, right? And how you improve that. If you're in the graphic design space, Photoshop helps you with your workflows, right? Taking something from idea to conception through to production. And I think what's interesting is, so then you look at that landscape from there all the way through to Mendix, OutSystems, ServiceNow, Pega, Appian, Microsoft Power Platform. Like, these are heavy lifting things, right? It was like, hey, and don't get me wrong, they can span spectrums, but it's like usually you're going to be bringing in your services partners are awesome for this, by the way. If you're a customer out there and you're struggling to figure out how to build things, go grab yourself a partner who uses this tech all the time. But like Accenture, Avanade, Capgemini come in and digital transformation project, and we're going to do this stuff. And then you get down to, I think, the scale you and I have played at, which is where it's been this obsession with breadth, right? Like success for me wasn't, oh, someone built one app with my low code thing, or 10 apps with my low code thing, or 100. It's like, you know, when someone would turn up and say, we've automated 10,000 processes on your platform, and we've trained 100 people on how to use it. Well, that's cool, right? So it's like, that's the spectrum. Now, I think what's interesting though is like, we start to look at, okay, to two parts this, right? One, I think it's a never ending journey, right? In terms of what we're up to in this space, because every day we think like we've nailed low code, some new technology emerges on the scene, and the software engineers, the programmers get to it first, right? So they find some magical new capability and they light it up in their applications, and everyone says, wow, that's wonderful. And the job, like, my job, your job, and like engineering product management side of things has always been to say, oh, how fast can we get that from there into the hands of people who don't know how to program, right? And I think like today's topic, like AI, is a great example of that, where you say, there's this amazing technology. It started as something that was accessible to programmers. How do we bring that down into the world of low code, right? So it's like, that's problem number one to solve, is like, how do we just keep as close as we can, as code innovates, as app dev innovates, how do we stay as close to it, right? The other problem, and I worry a bit about this right now, we're all distracted by the shiny objects, right? So we say, oh, AI and low code. I'd like an app that does something, the little cogs twirl and an app pops up on the screen. It's interesting, and we'll talk about that.
So it sounds like we've come a long way in terms of the low code, no code platforms, and we're helping a lot of people. But the question is that, have we actually been successful in achieving what we want to achieve with low code, no code platforms in general?
I think, so during discussion, I think we've done a good job of continually staying at the forefront of what's possible with pro dev tools, right? So can we help you every time new technology emerges, like AI? Can we help you consume that into your applications and move your business forward? Solve problems you couldn't solve before, solve them in better, more efficient ways. My worry right now as an industry is that we're super obsessed with AI, right? Like everyone is. And my worry is that sort of what I was hoping for is that we were starting to enter into a phase, and there's evidence of this across a number of vendors, right? But move into a phase where we recognize the broader application lifecycle, right? So for decades now, professional developers, the world around, there's a way we get apps built, right? Like, so we start with the business problem, and instead of people go and gather requirements, and historically that was business analysts. Now, in software companies, it's product managers, and we try to understand the user's problems, and we try and document those things. And then we get together and we start envisaging, like, how might we solve that? We're bringing user experience teams in, we're bringing devs in, and we're looking at, the why, the what, and the how, right? Simon Sinek, right? Full credit to him for that. And then we start to build, right? And then once we're building, we've got to test our applications. So we user acceptance testing. We've got to do actual proper like testing of the app to make sure it works. And test all our business rules, our process flows, and make sure we have all the right error handling in place. Then we have to deploy them. And then over time, we have to change them. We have to manage those changes, communicate those changes with people, let them know what's happening. We've got to deal with training. There's artifacts that support all of this. We've got to keep those up to date over time, like training manuals and all that kind of thing, videos and what have you. And then over time, and when we have to monitor, like, is this app behaving? Is it performing? Are we keeping it secured? And that sort of stuff. And eventually we sunset it. So maybe we've got to archive off the data and put that somewhere in case we need to bring it back in the future. And that's the end of it, right? And so my worry right now is that we're losing sight of that, because building is just one part of the problem, right? Like, look at our journey at, say, in tech days, there's a reason we bought a company called ProMap that did process documentation, because we had people with tens of thousands of processes, documented in our platform, but not documented in a way that was consumable by the business, right? And so it's that sort of thing, like, how do I do that? How do I capture? You talked about those different ways of building apps. There's a UI tier and the process tier and the data tier. So where are my entity relation diagrams, and where are my process flows, and where are my user experience mockups and things like that? And how does all that evolve over time? So I think I give us a good B+ as an industry, but I think there's a lot more to do. And actually, like the AI can help with some of that. So we'll look at the discussion we want to have here, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what are we doing with it today, and what might we do with it? It's like, okay, if that's the problem space, where can it apply all the way along that problem
Sure.
space, not just that one particular part of it?
Yeah, and I totally can relate with the problem that you're laying out. I mean, that's a problem we faced early in my careers, building software applications, coming from that background, moving it through different stages, or moving it from QA or test environment to production. They've got different set of credentials. How do we manage that? I totally can relate to it, and I agree. And as an industry, we've got a bit of work to do on that front in terms of the local platforms.
Oh, and it's not easy, right? Because like, here's the interesting thing: as an industry, like what you're always trying to do is say, okay, like here's how apps get built, like traditional way, programmers, code, all that kind of thing, built, managed, deployed, all the lifecycle stuff. And and so what you're always asking yourself, like on the product side, is like, how do I make that consumable? So it might not manifest the exact same way, right? Because even some of the nomenclature, like I still think there's a big problem. I have a debate with a good friend of mine, Harrison, over at QuickBase about this, and some of the folks there were like, you know, it's a no-code platform. And someone will be like, well, there's formulas. Like, well, is a formula code or is it not code? Like, are Excel Excel macros and Excel formulas, is that code or not? Splitting hairs, right? But you, even the fact that we talk about things like variables tells me we've still got a ways to go, right?
Sure.
Or that, like, look at, say, the origin story of a platform like QuickBase, very data centric, right? Where you say, well, as long as you have an ERD, you should be fine, right? Like, no problem at all building an app. Well, most people don't know what an ERD is, right? And even if they did, they wouldn't know how to design one effectively. Well, is this voice called normal form, or we're like, where are we at in terms of our data normalization? How you do that, and even things like, to your point, dev, test, prod, QA, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
as I said, totally can relate to it. But now I think we covered a bit, quite a bit about the local no-code platforms. Good time to shift gears and talk about AI, and specifically the state of AI in low-code no-code platforms. So where do you think that is, the current state of AI in low-code no-code platform?
I think this is one of those, like, you always ask yourself, like, you want to wake up smarter each day, and you want to be open to changing your mind. And I try, as my career goes on, I'm trying to become more and more flexible. Like, it's fair to say, if anyone who knows me probably knows, pretty dogmatic about some of this stuff a decade ago, right? But like, so I think everyone's doing a bunch of great work, and like the entire industry, everyone's moving at a million miles an hour, because you have to be seen to be innovating, right? If you're a public company, investors are wanting to know what's happening out there. Are you at the forefront? Are you going to be disrupted? If you're a Microsoft, even a Microsoft or Google can be disrupted. As you see, Google is potentially going to be disrupted in the search space by OpenAI, right? Potentially, who knows? And so your investors want to know, is that going to happen here? If you're a private company and you're a VC backed or a PE backed, you're just sort of like, oh, okay, is this, again, is a startup going to come and take me out here? Or, hey, Microsoft and Amazon and Google have more capacity on AI than anywhere else. Can I even compete with that kind of horsepower, right? And so I think everyone's moving super fast. And equally, I think we're in this phase of, we talk about like ideation, brainstorming, right? You've got the phase where you're expanding, and then the phase where you're kind of contracting and trying to get down to a rational set of things to invest in. I think right now, everyone's still sort of pushing out boundaries to see what's possible. And so you're seeing some really interesting stuff. And at the same time, you see some stuff where you're like, I don't know, it's a bit gimmicky, right? Like, maybe it's a flashy demo, maybe it helps a salesperson. There's all relevant stuff, right? Like, but I think a lot right now, we're kind of scratching the surface, trying to figure out what sticks. And I think there's a push that has to happen to take us beyond that, right?
But in general, Ryan, is AI something new to the low-code, no-code platform?
Always like this. We had some years ago, I was at a conference, and we had one of the sort of chief strategists from Salesforce come and talk, super smart guy. And I remember this one quote he had where he's like, it's serious when people stop calling it AI. Right? And so he was talking about things like the evolution of optical character recognition. Is that AI? Is that machine learning? Is that what is that? Right? And so things like that have been going on for a long time. Like people have been trying to leverage machine learning, and they've been trying to leverage computer vision to make these things smarter. Like here's a classic one. Where are we crushing it right now in Zenphi? Right? It's like I get an invoice and it's got a bunch of random stuff on it, and I want to be able to push that into the system. Now, a long time ago in a process management platform, like that's doable, and you can use optical character recognition to do it, right? But it was super rigid. So you'd say, okay, I get invoices from 30 suppliers, and each one looks different. So I've got to kind of codify each one of those 30 and mask out all the bits on the screen of where the data appears and things like that. And if something random turned up, we've got to kick it out to exception and manual processing. And we'd have to write a lot of code to do that. We'd maybe leverage some third-party component we'd pay money for. And now, like, hey, Google Vision Doc AI, just do that for me, right? Yeah. Magic, self-healing, figures it all out, tells you everything you need to know, right? So this stuff's been going on for a long time, and in particular, I mean, in the process space, right? I was looking at some notes before mine, going back a ways, like an old-fashioned notebook on the shelf over here, when we started talking about AI back in our Mintex days, right? And it's like 2014 era stuff, where we're starting to ask ourselves, how can we figure out like where things get, like the fascinating space for me in process automation, right? Is like what might happen, because processes are sort of this combination, somewhat deterministic, but you never quite know which path it's going to go through, right? So you're trying to account for all these different variations and exceptions and the likes. So how might you tell when any given process is running? I say we're building a commercial facility for businesses to lease and run their operations out of, and there's all these things that have to happen, and there's a deadline we have to meet. And how might you tell if you're going to miss that? And what are the signs? And if you just knew, like, how could you predict the outcome, and then how could you potentially adapt or self-heal based on that, or just start to adjust other things as a result, right? So this stuff goes back nearly a decade. We've been thinking about this and trying to apply these kind of technologies. So that's not new. Now, what's new is, hey, I can chat up this thing and magical stuff happens, right? Like, so what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me in terms of how I build apps, right? Like, so because you manage a team of developers working on Zenphi, how does it make them more productive? How does it make your marketing team more productive? And I know, right, because I know you're using it across the entire business in that regard, right? But then how do you pass that on to a user who's building an app, and how can they consume that power? So this part of it is obviously quite new and quite fresh. And I think this is a really good thing, because everyone's scrambling figuring out this. And then that draws back the attention to, okay, cool, but what are some of the meatier impacts we can have? I get it's nice to say, I'd like an app that automates my accounts receivable process and something pops up on a workflow canvas, right? But that's never been the hard part of the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Okay, so
go for it.
I assume you're talking more on now about the generative AI and the hype around, or I don't know whether hype is the right word, the thing going around generative AI, right?
It's justified hype, right? It's justified.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome, right? But let me ask this question actually. Is there actually a problem that we're trying to solve with Gen AI, or we've got a technology, we're trying to find a problem for it? I mean, that's a genuine question I'm asking,
Yeah.
I just put a pin on that. I'll come back to it, because great technology, awesome, just everyone in the world, went wow, and it's awesome. I mean, every time I use it, I'm surprised as well. And we use it across the business as well for different things, from content production. We measured when initially became available. We measured the side-by-side content production using Gen AI or through just purely human. The quality and the response, we just there was no brainer. We gotta go down this path of content production using Gen AI. But it's been all through chatbots, right? Everything I've seen has been through chatbots. I don't want to undermine the technology, huge technology, but then I don't know. Okay, let's bring it back to the low-code, no-code domain. Is there actually a problem we're trying to solve with Gen AI?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? And I will pick, just because of our backgrounds, right? Like I'll pick process in particular.
Sure.
So long time ago, if you wanted to improve a process, the first thing you did was document the process. And you had process excellent, process engineering excellence, and you had experts in the field, and there were notations and all this kind of stuff. And so people would write these massive spec docs, like this is our process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they duly get shelved somewhere with all the other spec docs, right? And that's sort of the end of it. And one day someone said, look, it's really hard to describe a process in words. We should have a visual way of doing that. And so was born the flow chart, right? And came about for a reason. And I find this certain irony in the fact that we're being dragged back to, and actually back then we had, Word documents with hundreds of pages, and we struggled to document a process, right? And now someone's like, here's a box that can take 255 characters. Could you describe your process in there? And we'll give you an app for it. And we're like, that's a little weird, right? And equally to your point. So here's another thing to consider. Yes, the technology can do this. Like I play around with it as much as everybody else, right? I think, hey, what would it look like to automate a process that looked like this? Well, because the large language models have consumed lots of information and documentation about processes and visualizations about processes and the likes, right? So if you say, I need a employee onboarding process, it's probably going to do you a pretty good job of saying it should look like this, right? But again, not many people walk up to low-code platforms, and we could come back to like, okay, is this a way to get new people involved or what have you? But few people that today know how to use a low-code platform. When someone, most of the time, you don't walk up to it and say, I wonder what I might do today, right? That's not how work works, right? People have jobs, they have things they're trying to achieve, they have problems they're trying to solve. So people come in with a problem. Like I've got to improve employee onboarding around here, right? And so most of the time, the problem is not I'm staring at a blank canvas wondering how that works, because I kind of know what my process is today. I've talked to all my stakeholders and know how they want to improve it. Like, yeah, we're having a hard time getting our job descriptions approved. It takes too long, and that delays us posting a job ad on LinkedIn, and then that delays our candidate acquisition. Cool. All right, let's go solve for that, right? And so the problem wasn't how do I build that or what have you. And so that's what's interesting at the moment, is because people are trying to get to the sort of simplistic view of a process where you'll type some prompts in a box and get a thing back that you can then publish. Now, the reality is what happens is you sort of, you build a thing and then you iterate and you test and you take it back to the users again, back to what we were talking about earlier. That's the beauty of low code. I can rapidly prototype and iterate. So I'm just not sure, like at the moment anyway, if I think about watching someone go from idea to app published, say it takes 2 weeks, and some apps are bigger, some are smaller, whatever, but let's say it's going to take 2 weeks today without AI, right? And you turn up and say, I can give you a jump start by typing in, I'd like an employee onboarding process, and something comes up, right? It's like, okay, did that take me from 2 weeks to a day? Probably not. Did it take me from 2 weeks to 1 week, 3 days? Probably. Is that really the big saving in the life of this application? I don't know, right? And then equally, now I've just used my AI credits, which are expensive, right? Data centers are running, fossil fuels being burned, whatever happens, right? Like, kind of solve that problem by having a template called employee onboarding that takes all my wisdom as a vendor from years of doing this across all my customers and say, this is roughly what that looks like, and have it in a gallery. Like what's the win in AI doing that I couldn't solve in some other way? So one of the things I'm always looking at is like, okay, AI can solve this, right? But like, is there a better, cheaper way? Because I have to pay the operational bill. Like if I'm head of product, head of engineering at any low code company, I'm going to pay the Azure bill sooner or later, right? And so is an appropriate use. So I took, to your point there, I'm like, well, there's two dimensions. One, is the problem to be solved? I don't really know what to build or how to build it, and therefore this has done that for me. That's problem number one. And then problem number two is like, is this actually the right way to solve? If that is the problem, is this even the best way to solve that problem? Or are there better, cheaper, faster ways of doing it? Now, and again, like you, I'm like amazed every day by what this technology can do. And some vendors are doing better at this than others, right? Like some of the stuff that comes out, I mean, full credit to the team at QuickBase. What comes out of their investments in the space is like a database with some triggers and bits and pieces and a dashboard with some charts and like some likely KPIs you might want to track and what have you. But okay, like what's beyond that now? Like I think everyone's got their version of that now. So what's beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I asked the question. Is that an actual problem what we're trying to solve? We're going back to the conversation we had like 10 minutes ago around low code, no code, and then the challenges that we still yet to be addressed was around the lifecycle management. I
Yeah.
mean, sure, one of the promises for the low code, no code was enabling a lot more people to be able to build app, or I mean, enabling the same people to build app faster. You know,
Hmm.
um, to your point, I'm just telling you from my experience, that, the first part of it, I totally agree. How much time can AI save you if Ryan, as a person who already knows how to automate processes, build apps, you know,
Yeah.
maybe brings you from 14 days, 2 weeks to 10 days. In the grand scheme of things, 3 days
Oh, yeah. You'll
is
take
good,
it,
but
but
it's not a thing. But
yeah.
would it put that copilot enable Vahid, who's never built an app, who's never automated a process to create something digital?
Really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Really good question.
I can jump on that from our experience with Zenphi, and before, we did collect a lot of data. Then
Mhm.
I'll pass it on to you. Sorry,
Yeah. No. So like, so tell me what you're seeing, and then
yeah, yeah,
because I think
absolutely.
this one's fascinating, right?
So we started. I mean, we captured data on everything. We started looking into this really deeply, and see where the actual problem is. For enabling Vahid, who has never done any
And where are you getting
automation.
stuck, right?
Yeah, and then tech savvy, but I've never created an app. I've never automated any process. So interestingly, using the platform, dragging and dropping, or just however you configure it, however the platform was not the main showstopper. They learned that quite easily. It's just one step before that. It's just defining the whole thing, putting that prompt in there.
Right.
What am I going to put in that prompt? Sure. Again, just want to highlight this is just about the people who have a new breed of people who haven't digitized or automated processes. So for them, explaining that employee onboarding, employee offboarding, or expense this thing, that thing, that's a difficult bit. How do I explain it?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do I break down the what do you call the steps? The technologies that I need to use. That was we saw that's a difficult bit, and even with the current state, well, we tested this and we figured, it's not helping them that much. It's still, yeah, sure, give them, they type something, give them something, but they get it started. They pretty much, we didn't see anyone being able to get a full-fledged thing up and running. They still would need quite a bit of help. But once you help them and get over the first thing, basically drawing the flow chart of what they want on a piece of paper, not even on a computer, explaining what it is. That's a difficult bit we figure.
Yeah.
So so yeah, sorry, I jumped
No, but I think that's
the queue.
and I'm gonna we'll have a bit of a laugh about some of my own recent low code adventures, right? And as part of this conversation, but I think so. What's fascinating to me is that you, yeah, you what you really want to do is focus on how people iterate, right? Like to your
Mhm.
point, like okay, employee onboarding, great. Now what happens? Now what happens? Now what happens? Now what happens? And again, full credit to everyone who's making their investments. Like, here's an app, as if from a few words, here's an app. That's magical, right? That's cool. Now what? Doesn't quite do what I want. All right, crack open the workflow designer, open up the database schema designer. So if we presume, like, let's pretend for a moment, this technology is going to enable someone who today, as of like right now,
Mhm.
finds low code beyond their reach, but we're going to give them a text box and now they're going to be able to do this. And so they do their thing, an app comes out, and then they say it doesn't do what I want, and we throw them right back into the experience that just 24 hours earlier confused them. So that's not really a win, right? And again, like I said, we've all as an industry got more work to do to help with that. So where I think this technology has to improve is the next steps, right? So if we're going to go down this path where I type prompts and I get an app, and I say, well, it doesn't quite do what I want. So now more prompts. Doesn't quite do what I want. More prompts doesn't quite do what I want. Now I don't know about you, but this is one area where I think, and of course this will get better. Sam Altman, right? This is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah.
But for now, the technology I don't find is particularly good at incremental improvements,
Mhm.
right? And by that, so if anyone here who's tried it, right, uh, hey, create me some essay about something, whatever. It's not quite right. Tweak it a little bit. It literally goes off and just redoes it all. Like it's super hard to get it to say no, 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 no. Like you've got it 90% right, but I just want you to change this one part. And it's like cool. Let me redo the whole thing for you. No, like I want paragraphs 1, 2, and 5 to stay the exact same. Just change out this piece of it, just in this way. And so, like, so again, back to like, okay, well, after I've done a bunch of that, and I'm typing these words furiously in anger at this thing, like, no, it's not quite right. It's not quite right. Just drag and drop the workflow. And so how do we help with that? And so I think this is one of the questions. So you're asking this question, right? Like, what's the problem to solve for? This part of low to no code app dev is like a cultural thing. I've been in this space a long time. My goal has never been to enable everyone to build apps. It's been to enable a certain class of person that looks at the world and says, I want to go solve this. That's encouraged and incented by their leadership. That's, given recognition for the hard work that they do for solving some problem. That's, held up amongst their peers as someone who's really trying to transform a business. Like it's that, and not everyone's like that, and that's okay, right? But it's like so I think that's one of the things is like, okay, that's some North Star aspirational thing, but I don't think we should kill ourselves with that. And so I think one of the things right now is to say, look, there is a really big population of people who can do low code stuff and do low code stuff. So like, how do we target them? And that's where I think we need to look at some of this. Now, coming back a bit to this example I mentioned, I recently was working on some low code stuff and I was using Zenphi to do it, right? And you and I are having a laugh because I go, well, this took me 3 days and I thought it should have taken 2. And you're laughing because you're like, I'd have done it in 1 because I know Zenphi better than you do type of thing, right? And so it's like, that's part of the thing. Once you get to know a platform, get to learn a platform. So like so now if I'm thinking, well, is AI got a role to play here? How can I use AI to help you learn this technology faster, get better at working with these tools and technologies? How can I help it take you on a journey of discovery, right? Like I always like a good friend of mine, Andy Swanson, right? He always had this this sort of, he's a sales guy. He's always talking to the customer about then what happens, then what happens, then what happens. Now, because it's sales guys, because he's trying to sell the other thing we can use to help with the other part of the problem. But it was always that, how do you expand the scope of the app, the scope of the automation, the scope of the improvement in the business? And I think that's where we have to go with some of this technology around building apps anyway, is like, what happens next? What happens next? Have you thought about this? Have you considered that? You want to track this thing? Do you also want to track that thing? Like some of that kind of prompting, I think, can be super beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. Just one thing I want to call out, I mentioned, I don't personally, I don't think the technology is still there that we can. The effort is best spent in creating something, a co-pilot, which enables everyone in the world to create an app. At some point in time, we're gonna get there. I'm sure the AI will improve that we get there. Culturally, if that's something we want to do or not, that's a different question. But at the moment, I based on the data that at least we have, it's not the main problem to address. That's what we see. Some point in time, the effort's gonna go there. I'm sure there's gonna be enough a good technology to be able to do that. Nowadays is I'm just trying to say I cannot enable Vahid, who's never done it, go to Copilot and say, automate this process for me and just get it and walk away and use it. Now,
well, the question along that path as well is like, there's somewhere out there is like, what is an app anymore? Does that fundamentally change, right? Because one thing I think is novel right now is like, whatever vendor's doing, and they should, right? It's like, I'd like so insert vendor here, right? I'd like a Zenphi workflow that does blah, blah, blah. I'd like a Microsoft Power Automate I'd like a QuickBase app that does, right? And so then what you do as a vendor is you take the LLM, you teach it about your schema, and you give it all the history of all the apps that have ever been built and that kind of thing. And then it creates one of your things, right? So there's like, but there's a future here is like, what if apps manifest in a different way? So if you really play out, if I was to do total over the horizon thinking in this space, it would be, I've got a business problem. Can you solve it for me? Sounds like that needs an app. Sounds like that needs a database. Sounds like that needs like, how does that manifest? And does that manifest with a traditional UI forms like we experience today? Or does that manifest with a chat experience or a voice experience or I'm in a virtual world or whatever? So I think there's that sort of balance. There's like total over the horizon stuff. And then there's like, okay, near term, what do we do with this? And are we poking our attentions in the right areas? Because I think there could be bigger lists around the actual app itself, right, as opposed to the creation part of it, because the app lives long past it being built,
Sure.
and it has to deliver business value long past the original
Yeah.
lifted building, and that's where I start to look for the benefits, right?
Okay, that's a
Like,
great segue. I was gonna say this, but you just took the conversation there. So if I want to divide it in using AI to build something, automate something, an app, and then using AI in the operation,
yeah,
that's another aspect of it. So I guess that's to your point. You're saying apps gonna or process is gonna leave and get executed for a long time. So what are your thoughts on the other side of it? Enabling companies, enabling users, companies, builders to utilize this new technology, generative AI specifically, in their day-to-day operation.
yes, I think there's so let's split it out, right? Because there's the generative AI, and then there's the bigger AI. Like it's a subcategory of, right? And so when we get into the how does this work in the day to day, there's a couple things. So one, let's tackle the generative AI part of it. And again, signs that some vendors are doing this. Zenphi's obviously made investments in this regard. So I've got some application or I've got some process, and it's counting on people to do some work. It's counting on people to make some decisions, take some actions or the likes. And so what you're always doing in that world as a low code person is trying to figure out, efficiency, effectiveness. Like, so how can I help you do the thing, the thing in a better way, the right way, a better way, faster, cheaper, better, all that kind of
Yeah.
thing, right? So now I say, okay, how how can I every step of the way, you think about a maturity model here, where you say, okay, I documented a process and now I've got everybody following it. This is how it should be done. Great. Still people, still manual work, start to finish. And then you come back through and you say, okay, where can I improve this process, right? So, are there ways I can cut the time it takes to do something? Are there ways I can drive a better quality output or outcome, right? Can I help people make decisions faster, providing them with more context or more information on the journey so they don't have to go look things up? And then ultimately, you sort of go down this path where at every step of the way, you say, well, can I actually take, and it sounds harsh, but like, can I automate this work completely? Like, this is a discussion you and I was having about, it's like
Mhm.
orchestration versus automation. So like step one on a process maturity journey is orchestrating. Get it, document it, make sure it's happening that way, make sure that's the best way, make sure all the time it's going like that, make sure we're logging it, we've got audit history, all that kind of stuff. And then the little automation wheel starts spinning like, wait a minute, do you really need to print a thing, put it in an envelope, send it to someone, have them sign it, have them send it back, take it out, scan it?
Mm.
No, right? We use DocuSign. It's pretty well established that, right? And so, uh, are there ways we can start to, take the human, out of the loop, remove the burden on the human, that type of thing? And so these are all places where I start to ask, well, can I use these services, right? And so, can I send something off? Like, here's a great example. I know you were playing with this recently, right? It's like, okay, I want to post a job and I've got thousands of candidates applying for the job.
Yeah.
Right? So is there a way in my process where I can say, hey, GPT, and for anyone out there, you can do this. It's pretty impressive. And here's my job description. Here are all the candidates. Give me some kind of qualitative view of how good a fit that candidate is for that job. And now I'm trying to like, first of all, I'm trying to scale myself. I was talking to someone the other day who got, I think it was like 2,000 applications for a job. I'm like, what do you even do with that? Right. And so first I'm scaling myself, because normally what people would do is literally over some silly criteria. It's harsh, but like they'd pick some arbitrary criteria and like call everything that doesn't meet that. All these people have under 3 years experience, they go away next, and so on and so forth. So, so you're trying to reduce the set you actually look at properly. Well, now I can actually look at them all properly and all qualitatively and quantitatively. I can look at some of those metrics, right? And I can get some kind of score or rating back, and I can get some set of recommendations. Cool. That's an interesting first step. Um, who's the best fit? And by the way, hopefully remove some of the bias. Lots of conversation around bias in AI, but hopefully remove some of the selection bias from that, just from how I might look at those resumes. Because when you look at a resume, we're all humans, so we're going to look at the formatting and the layout, and those silly things that don't really matter about candidates' appropriateness for the job. And then you say, okay, well, that's one step. What could come next? Well, we're scheduling the interviews with these candidates. what are some areas I should probe on? What are some effective questions I can ask? I was doing this exercise the other day with someone. We one really hard skill, and I've been at this for a long time, right? A good mentor of both you and I, Wayne Wilson, always poking on the precision questioning and open questioning.
Mm,
So you look at your interview questions, you're like, these are all closed things. And so how can I take my questions and rewrite them and make them more tailored to that particular candidate? And so these are massive savings, right? For a process like that, like how you go hire a new person. So I think that's a super interesting application of this technology. And so as you all know, at Zenphi, and from a process perspective, what you're trying to do is say, how can I help someone who's building a process easily take a piece of content and feed it into the AI and engineer the prompt the right way as part of that to get the most effective response back with the least amount of hallucination. Because that's a lot of what's going on, right? Like I've been playing recently with Microsoft's Copilot Studio, right? And that's a whole environment designed to help you sort of scope things as much as possible to get the least hallucination possible
mm,
and provide targeted sources of content, right? So um, basically training it to be more accurate based on the things you're trying to achieve. And so that to me is a whole fascinating space, right? And that I think there's some super quick wins there. And it helps with that maturity model of, can I enhance the human? Can I help them make a decision faster? So it's a real true co-pilot at
mm,
runtime, right? So that's one part of it. But then, okay, there's all the other application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so it is interesting. I go back to this meeting I had one time with an exec over at Amazon, right? And I was showing so we'd acquired a company that did process documentation, and Amazon was a huge customer, right? And this is in the part of their business that looks at how they handle security response, incident response, that type of thing, CrowdStrike being top of mind, right? And so he was taking me through all these processes. And of course, I'm there as the automation guy saying, let me show you how you can automate all this stuff. And he made a really smart observation that, and it's not like I don't know this, right? But you're always blinkered to your own little worldview. Is It's like, this is my process. And Ryan, it's got 20 steps in it. And from what you've just told me, for each of those 20 steps, you can take executing on those steps from somewhere between, 2 to 10 minutes down to seconds. That's cool. So 20 steps, you save me on average 5 minutes of steps. That's 100 minutes. That's great. It's like, that's not the problem with this process. The problem with this process is where it comes unstuck, where someone forgets to talk to someone, where there's wait times between the activities. That's where
mm,
it comes unstuck. If you come back and tell me how you can help me with that, and these are human problems, these are communication and collaboration problems, these are where do I find the asset problems, like that's super interesting, right? And so again, always the blinkers on people who are focused on like automation and just total efficiencies, like oftentimes those are actually quite minimal savings in the scheme of things. So again, we're just talking about building is just one part of that life cycle. And
mhm,
so maybe we're potentially risking picking up pennies for want of a better description here. And then now you're over here saying, what if I could take electronic signatures from 2 seconds to 1 second? Go look at the other problems, right? Go look to solve for the other problems. Now, some of that will come down to, well, if you can take people out of the process entirely, right? That's probably the fastest fix.
mhm.
But invariably, that is where most of these processes come unstuck. Someone still has to go do things, and in particular, a lot of processes involve actually go do work, go talk to people, go group together and come up with ideas or what have you. Like these are things where facilitation of that activity and providing people with greater context is what's critical, right? And so then again, same sort of thing. Okay, we're working on, we've got a process that's around coming up with a campaign brief for a new piece of product capability we're launching. Here's some ideas to feed into that,
Mhm.
right? Like there's an interesting application of it. And again, we're all going to go away now and do that creative thing we do. But like, here's some ideas to get you started. So that's, I think, the areas where we have to start to look at here in terms of application of this technology.
Yeah, I mean, like from my point of view, I mean, of course, as a company, also we made a decision, also considering all of our resources to focus on more the second part, enabling people to
Yeah.
use it, but then appreciating there's a lot more involved before that in the whole orchestration, understanding at the business level, the bigger processes of what's happening. The example you mentioned there, the job application, is a very good one. We borrowed from one of our users, clients, and then we adopted it internally. You know,
Mhm.
because to your point, first, if you get 200 or 2,000 resume, you want to go through them manually. The next best thing is that to get them one by one, upload them to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Cloud, whatever you're using, and say, hey, compare it with against this job description. Give me the reasons why it's good, why it's bad. Still manual. And the interesting thing for me was the job applications comes in, the way we started using it and the client was using it, it automatically puts it through, removing that human aspect of it. That's the bit we could do with that one, which just took us, I don't know, half an hour to
Right.
create this. They automatically put it through the Gen AI, compare it with set of instructions, give me the reasons why, if it's
Yep.
good, why it's good, or the areas that I need to go and ask for more question. If it's not, doesn't, it's not good, why it's not good, just
Yeah.
automatically
And what's
doing it.
interesting there, right, is so what you're talking about is prompting, right? And so what's interesting equally, if we go back to problem with low code apps is, it's hard for people blank canvas and stuff. So I don't know about you, because I've had this myself. Consider myself relatively tech savvy, right? Like I
Yeah.
was once a developer. And writing the prompt, sometimes I look at the blank box and you're like, which like what do I
Yeah, I
write in
know.
here?
I
To
know.
get it right. So when you think about something like process automation and the idea that you can drop an action into a workflow canvas and say, with this collection of documents in my Google Drive,
Yeah.
for each one, send it in here with a carefully crafted prompt that is executed the exact same way every time. Right. And so again, getting back to why is it we love process automations, like efficiency and effectiveness, a big part of that is doing the right thing the right way every time, the best way every time. Right.
Mhm.
And so even something as simple as that, it's like, well, now, so now you get into how do I help a low code person build a good prompt, which I now we're in inception, right? Because it
Yeah,
sets apart.
like I've got a trick there. I learned the trick. I went
Yep.
to ChatGPT and I said, "You act as a prompt engineer. This is what I'm gonna do. Give me the prompt that I should ask you." I
That's
mean,
right.
I've used that trick a few times. I
But
still just
but now this is hang on to this one, right? Though, because this is super interesting. So now, product idea for you guys, right? Which is like, okay, now we get back to I'd like an app that does blah blah blah. So so how do we move beyond that and use it in this way, right? Which is like, I'm like, I want you to pretend you're a process consultant and you're trying to help me find the most effective way to do this thing through a combination of available technologies, including large language models. How might I go about so again, it's like that's a lot more interesting than just can you build me an app that does some stuff, right?
right.
So this is the kind of and it's these conversations. Like I worry, one of my worries right now is every company's like in their own little bubble, right?
Mhm.
Now, I have the luxury right now of not working for any one low code company. So I can like, I jump around and I can look at everyone's and I can play with everyone's and I can see what they're all doing. And I spend quite a bit of my time doing that at the moment. And yeah, I actually think we could probably move faster as an industry if people talk more openly, right? Like this kind of discussion you and I are having here is like, imagine you could have this with the same people at Out Systems, at Creatio, at Betty Blocks, at QuickBase, at Nintext, right? And we could actually say, okay, park for a moment, yes, we're all competitors, but we're all kind of trying to crank in a direction. And by the way, like, I know you and I talked about having a discussion around this. We're, equally, everyone's kind of looking at Microsoft going, "Oh, like that Power Platform thing's pretty impressive, right? It's got its place, it's got its challenges. And like they've got a lot of people working on that. So what do we do that's different? Or like how do we adjust and adapt to that? And so I think as an industry, like more open discussion around like what are we trying to do here as an industry? Who are we trying to help? Do we want to be a little more realistic about
Mhm.
who's in and who's out right now, right? And focus our efforts in that regard. It'd be interesting to have more open dialogue.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's gonna benefit everyone, including the end users and the whole
Mm.
industry as a whole.
And because like here's the funny thing, like normally I would normally, yeah, like as a product person, no one's comes to me like I'm not talking to people about my ideas and my roadmap, right? But like here's the interesting thing, as you're seeing right now, I mean, pretty much everyone's picking one of a handful of models and they're doing the same thing. here's my schema, here's all the apps that have ever been built, kind of in an aggregate normalized way, so you can't tell about the particulars of any given customer in their application. Now, when someone asks you to build a thing, go look at that. What are the entities? What are the steps? Oh, here's the thing back, right? Like, so, like that sort of stuff. We're not,
Hmm.
I mean, does someone get there because they started a week earlier or they've got 5 engineers more? Maybe, right? But like a lot of that stuff, we're all working off of common technologies. That's not how you're really truly going to differentiate, right? Like local no vendors differentiate on so many different. Are you direct? Are you targeting this segment? Are you in this geography? Do you go to market through partners or whatever it happens to be? They're like, I'd like an app better than yours is probably not how you're going to win that battle, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
No, just saying, just
yeah.
saying.
I agree. I agree. Like, I totally agree. As I said, the industry and the end users can benefit as a whole if um the players work together in this context. Just try to define and help defining the future of that co-pilot. I call it co-pilot. Hopefully, at
Yeah.
some point becomes pilot. Um, but like from our point of view, as I said, I was alluding to this point that we made a conscious decision. We just put our effort mainly on enabling usage of AI in the
Yep.
operations. We do have co-pilots. We did that, but that hasn't been our main focus. And we believe in the enabling users to use it. Um, was being is more important, at least given our situation. I know company to company is different. And like something I was looking at July stats and put something on LinkedIn about it. It was extremely exciting to see. Most
All that.
executed automated process or flow for us is the one is using generative AI.
Hmm.
It's awesome. I mean, that was great to see. I mean, top three they use AI one way or another, but
Right.
the top one, the first one, is using generative AI is to extract unstructured information, information from unstructured document. Um,
Right.
the other interesting one, like talking about generative AI, I've seen that is enabled is like translation. Good translation has always been there, but
Oh.
then generative AI has taken it to the next level. Now we've got a really good process. A customer of ours uses it to translate the whole document while keeping the
Hmm.
format of it, and the document stays the same. Just the text gets translated. So if you've got an image here, it stays as an image, but then
You can even go one better than that because you look at one of the historical challenges there. Now you can take the image, which has English language overlaid on top of it, and you
yeah,
can manipulate the image to have French or
yeah,
German or Japanese characters or whatever, right? Like,
yeah.
and this is one of the interesting things. So you sort of get into how can I help people, which is what we've always done. How can I help people make their current processes better, right?
Mhm,
And then there's this other question is like, okay, are there things you couldn't have done before that I can now help you with, right? Because and both of these are super interesting. Like, as a product manager, that's where you have to try to start to place your bets, right? Like, so stepping back, like, do I build something that helps me bring more customers to my platform? Do I
mhm,
build something that helps me enable more users within my customer base to build apps?
mhm,
Do I do something that helps people build better, stickier apps on my platform? Do I do something that helps someone create an app they could never create before on my platform? Now, these are all valid things to do. And as product managers, we've got scoring mechanisms and what have you to decide, well, where do we invest our dollars and what's most important to us as a business right now? That space of things you couldn't do before is super interesting to me as well, right? And so when you think about things like the language translation and the quality of that, or you think about things like video, images, voice, which were things that up until now, like, can't really automate that, or it's a step in a process that says, hey, skilled creative person, go do a thing, right? Where now you can say, like, look at our our good friend Brian, and Nintex co-founder and off now as the CEO of Wellset Labs, right?
yeah,
And Wellset Labs is all about taking text and turning it into voice. Lots of applications for that technology. What turns out a really fascinating place for it is using it within the enterprise and using it as part of processes around how you disseminate information, how you onboard employees, how you create marketing collateral, and something you and I both played with, right? Like as soon as we heard Brian was doing that, we went to Wellsite Labs, we grabbed their API, we threw it into Zenphi. And whoa, what if there was a process where I could say, hey, I want to put out a press release, I want it to be in the voice of my CEO, but also I want you to create versions of that in multiple different languages, but still have it sound like that person. And look, whole like Zenphi can take care of that. Now, again, not a problem we could have solved before. And now all of a sudden we've got this like compelling new use case on the platform. I think that's super interesting.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned, I mean, something. So, okay, so you've got this luxury at the moment. You go across many different.
It's an unpaid luxury, by the way, but yes,
it is. It is good. It's really good to see that you go across all these vendors. Is there any specific vendor you want to call out which has done a great job? I don't know. I know everyone is doing a lot with AI, right? Everyone is doing basically. I haven't heard that anyone you pick anyway doing AI one way or another. Was there any specific vendor you'd like to call out, or just maybe not necessarily? I mean, they're doing something that you like.
I know you're doing the classic. Ryan, can you pick your favorite kid?
Maybe that's not a fair question. But
right. However, so what I will say is this: I think everyone, as I started out, I think everyone is doing exactly as you would expect. They're running fast, they're scrambling, they're trying to figure out how this fits in. They're dealing with external pressures to show some proof or deliver some results. They're devs, they're scrambling to learn how to use this technology, or like all these things are going on. And so I'll start by giving full credit to everyone. Like everyone's jumped on this, and everyone's trying to do something, and everyone's got some flavor of thing out there that they've been demonstrating or that's coming soon or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's good. Equally, I would challenge all of them to say, okay, like if I was a buyer and any of these vendors turned up and showed me that I'd like an app that blah, 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 I'd say, that's cool. I'm sure some people in my company will use that. Like, what else are you doing? Like, show me like a classic, like, what are the next 3 things? What are the next 5 things? What are the next 10 things you're doing? Talk to me about that roadmap, because that's what I'm super interested in, right? Like, what are the new use cases that I can solve with this? What are the things that I can dramatically improve? And I mean dramatically, like what are the orders of magnitude things that I can improve here because of what you're doing in this space? What are the business outcomes I can get, right? What are the improvements I can see from this? Because make no mistake, and everyone's trying to figure out their business model right now, like this will cost you. Like as a buyer of this technology, and it's not like I was buying low code yesterday for $3 a user a month, and now they're giving me magic AI for $3 a user. I'm like, it's like everyone's going to be, it's either in their enterprise plan, their premium plan, or it's an add-on to all their plans. So you're going to pay for this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see a bit of pushback right now on the buyer side. So forget the work I'm doing with the vendors at the moment. But on the buyer side of things, we're definitely hitting this wave of people saying, like, wait a minute, like what's the real ROI here? And is everybody actually using this? And how do I know I'm getting bang for buck? I mean, I know some of it's obvious, right? Like I had someone the other day was talking about what they paid for their Copilot add-on to their Microsoft license, right? And like, well, I'm only going to buy it for a certain set of people or whatever. Like, yes, it's expensive at face value, but equally, I kind of look at it and you think, if you can't save $20 a month with this for the average office worker, something's not quite right. Now, some of this stuff I think normalizes over time, but it's just, that's the sort of thing that's going on. And so is there any one vendor that stands out to me? I don't think so. I mean, I do keep a really close eye on, my old employers, like they're 10 minutes from my house here right now at Microsoft. I think the Copilot Studio stuff is interesting because that's probably the first vendor I've seen that's trying to do work to help you kind of build and codify the prompts at scale. And I think I'd like to see, more of what vendors are up to in that regard. But that's a very particular application of it, right? And it's actually, it's hard to step back and figure out where to put it to work, right? You're like, oh, I've got to write this. And I came across a few examples going back to our earlier conversation where I'm like, but that's just a well-structured SQL query on a database, right? So like, okay, I've got all this work to build a prompt so the question becomes, tell me about my 5 top sales opportunities, right? I said, hey, GPT, so you write this little prompt. And by the way, but only look at this type of record, scoped in this kind of way, because I don't want you hallucinating about things. And when you give me the response, I want you to give me the response in this exact tabular format based on these input parameters with these output parameters. I'm like, that sounds like a SQL query to me. And again, I've spent a ton of time writing a prompt. I got to work out how to test that prompt. The prompt's still going to be non-deterministic because that's kind of the nature and the creativity of the beast, right? And then I got to pay money to use my Azure credits on my AI. I'm like, I don't know. I think I could probably just write a standard query against Salesforce that would give me that, right? So like I think, and or like in that world, like Salesforce, this is the world of cloud workflow, right? But Salesforce does that anyway. So do I want to write that over here, or would it just go, hey, Salesforce, use your magic and give me my top 5 opportunities because they've implemented that? So like there's a whole weird world there. But I think that like Copilot Studio, I think is super interesting, right? Like how you go about building and now back also to our earlier conversation, like out of the gate, what they're doing is bringing lifecycle to that. So like versioning of the prompts and testing of the prompts and things like that, because I think they're cognizant that there's a lot of uncertainty around this stuff. And so like that's what I encourage a lot of vendors to think about. It's like, okay, how do I like pretty much every app in a low code platform is highly deterministic in its nature. And now you're going to throw in this curveball of like, maybe it doesn't give you the same answer each time. Like, so how do you sanity check that stuff? Like, how do you take a pulse check on it and make sure it's like consistent, especially if you're going to start like, let's play this stuff out. You're going to start handing off decision making to it, right? Because that's where some of this gets super interesting. Like, hey, should I approve this leave? Should I approve this expense? Should I hire this person? Should I, sign off on this discretionary budget usage? And we're going to go down a path of moving from traditional rules engines where this stuff is like heavily codified into just let GPTs figure it out, right? It's like, and so what you'll find there is there's going to be a scale. Like if that's a, should I give this person this dosage of chemotherapy treatment or not? Probably people are going to be a little skeptical of it. If it's like, should I approve Vahid to leave? Yeah, like, sure, fine, whatever, right? Like it's not life threatening. So yeah, some scope to play around there.
Like the two more topics. I'm cautious of time. Two more topics I want to cover. Hopefully, we get to cover them quickly. And some of them you alluded to towards around the challenges around the whole thing in bringing AI into here. Like something you've been talking about has been the non-deterministic nature of the generative AI, specifically talking about generative AI.
Yeah.
Like what are the challenges you see there that for adoption, for usage of the technology?
So I think it's like all things low code, right? For the longest time as an industry, we talk about governance and manageability, right? And that's usually when it suggests you need a governance strategy here, and everyone's like, oh yeah, governance strategy very important. Like, what does that actually mean, right? And so if we step back and we say, what does it mean to enable hundreds or thousands of people to build thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of solutions, deploy those into our business that we count on both strategically and operationally, right? What are the checks and balances we have to have in there? Who can build these things? What training do they have to go through before they can build something? Are there different levels of training that let you build different types of applications? How do we track and monitor those applications? How do we know when they're being successful, not successful, when they might have broken or what have you, right? Like you get back to, we talk lifecycle and how does AI apply across all of this? Now, how might AI tell me someone's stealing data from an application? How might AI tell me someone's built an application that's capturing like PII and that's against their company policy? So things like that. So you need a good governance and management strategy in place. You need good ways to control the security of the environment, to be able to understand what's going on. If you've got a data breach, how do you handle it? All this kind of stuff, right? And that doesn't change for this. In fact, it's probably, hey, if you're down that path, great, keep working on it and bring this into that now. If you're not down that path, get on that path before you start thinking about opening up this technology to the broader user base, right? But I would caution this a little bit for the customer, right? Just like, look, not all apps are created equal, right? And so if we go from strategic application, I run my company, this thing fails, we fail as a company, we literally go out of business, or there'll be some, critical event for us, all the way down to, I need to request some new stationery. I'd like to move offices. I want a substand desk type applications and everything in between, right? Now, one of the problems I see in companies where they go hard core on the governance and management side of things is that they restrict some of that creativity and some of that small operational stuff, right? And we've talked about this in the past, right? So when you think about apps and processes, you sort of, there's the engine of a company, and then with every good engine, there's the oil that lubricates the engine, right? And the trouble is, if you get too restrictive, people don't work on those things that keep things humming along, the oil in the engine seizes up, right? And so I think you have to recognize not all apps are created equal. Not all apps have the same risk profile to the organization. And so I'd encourage people to think about experimentation here. Whereas like, look, for this class of app, let people do AI stuff and see how it goes, right? See if it helps them out. Up at this end of the spectrum, more checks, more balances, more testing, more rigor. AI watching the AI. Like, how can we build testing tools that can look at the AI and say, wait a minute, for this kind of thing, like you can't be wrong with that answer, right? So are we really sure what we're doing here with this suggestion or this recommendation or whatever? Again, creative brief for an ad campaign. Give me 50 suggestions. I don't care, right? Like, how do I allocate budget within my company? Well, I might want a little more scrutiny around that kind of thing. So that's, I'd encourage people to like, hey, just good old wholesome governance and management, work with your vendor, get your strategy in place, talk to some experts in the industry, analysts, Forrester people, Gartner people, analysis.tech, little plug for my venture with Rob Koplowitz and John Reimer, Dave Marcus, and others, right? Continue to focus on that and start to bring this into that, but don't be too restrictive, because too restrictive, other people are going to start pushing ahead of you.
Okay, I guess that's if I understand correctly, that puts a bit of responsibility on the vendors to try to provide some of these functionalities over time, out of the box, for better governance and management and security. I mean, we didn't talk about data as well. We gotta. I mean, I guess everyone is getting more educated that you shouldn't put your data at risk of being used in the training, so it does show up somewhere else.
Yep.
That's a good thing. But at the same time, I mean, I want to briefly go back, and I'd say as a vendor that becomes a challenge for the co-pilot aspects of it, right? Because you want to create co-pilot, you gotta. It's just the lack of data. You cannot use company X's data to help company B. I don't know if that makes sense, because the way the business operations are part of their IP. That's something we always say. It's your IP, and the way you do your purchase approval or sales contract approval,
It's
unique to you, and then could be your IP. And you don't want it to be used as a part of training of an AI, which is used for another company. It could be your competitor.
Yep.
So as a vendor, I think that's a challenge for us, and that's what I was trying to. It's not just about the technology, building those or automated processes, whether it's app, whether it's a flow. It's also the data part of it. We don't want to cross the boundaries and misuse companies' data.
It's super hard, right? Because, and this one thing, like the problem in industry right now, as you can see in all the legal cases mounting, right? It's like everyone's basically, ask for forgiveness later. And so the risk of this for sure becomes, they're like, so especially in the world of process, right? Like so many of our customers over the years would say that their processes are actually what differentiates them as a company, right? You either do, how do you compete with someone? Do something different, or do the same thing but do it infinitely better, right? Orders of magnitude better. And orders of magnitude better is your processes. And so riddle me this, as a vendor in the process space. So how do I train the model? I look at all the processes ever built on my platform, right? And then how do I deliver that in a way? How do I scale that back to go, I don't show people the exact details of this? And it's actually super hard. I know people who've, and you guys are working on this as well, right? It's like, that's actually a super hard thing to work out how to do. Then you get into things like, how do you talk a bit about data? How do you populate that app with, say, synthetic data to help with testing of the app to make sure you're doing the right things, right? So how do you do that in a way that doesn't cause problems? Like, it's a great example of this one. Like I've mentioned this to you before. If you go to so the New Zealand government website where you apply for your passport, right? And it uses random information. It's got the classic, put your first name here, example, John. Put your last name here, put your middle name here, that type of thing. Well, it turns out that that's random data, except for the fact that they used my brother's details, right? And not last name, obviously, but like a bunch of the details that pop up as examples. And like literally they just took my brother's record and removed his last name. And like, that's weird. And now I've exposed him and them, right? But like they that kind of problem exists,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
like, but equally benefit, we talked a little bit about like a huge thing that I think is missing in the world of low code application development right now is testing, right? How do you appropriately test an app to make sure it works the same way? And when you make a change, how do you make sure you don't break it? The best way to do that is with synthetic data.
Sure.
AI is fantastic for creating synthetic data, fantastic for being able to run test harnesses over the top of an application. So again, some risks, but some huge potential gains from
Yeah.
application of the technology. Yep.
But I know switch to the vendor side. I don't keep going back to the vendor side. The challenges
Yeah.
we face as vendors, but good thing to cover for the end users. The being conscious of the governance
Yeah. When
and
you're choosing,
yeah,
what
when
questions
you're
do you ask?
choosing, and then just don't be too rigid while you have the control over it. Don't be too rigid, otherwise people stop working on it. Great stuff. One last question in this one, and then we go and wrap up. Again, non-deterministic aspect of it. Do you think exposes the challenge for the end users, for the clients in their operations?
Yeah, I think it's so. This is a case where I would say, yeah, you really need to look at where you can benefit from that, right?
Mhm.
So the one argument is people call it hallucinations, right? Like, oh, this thing hallucinates, you can't trust it. And the other argument's like, that's the magic of it. It hallucinates. That's because it's like people, like we hallucinate. And that is, I think, one of the most interesting. I'm trying to remember how I came across this, but I've heard it several times recently, like podcasts and what have you. It's like we all hallucinate, right? That's what we do as people. It's not like, hey Ryan, where should we go in this low code thing? Like, I'm going to give you a deterministic factual answer. We're
But
making
isn't
things
it
up.
why
We're
we
taking
put processes in place? Sorry, Ryan. Isn't it why we put processes in place to remove
yes
that
to remove
hallucination,
the
a human
bias and the
factor of it, out of it?
correct. And so that's what I think is super interesting here, right? So particular to the world of process, right? Process as we know it today is designed to be deterministic, right? And and to minimize that. But again, equally, there's places where we say go to a person because I want a person to do that magic thing people do, right? So I think you need to look at the processes and say, okay, which ones need to be deterministic? At which point, likely where you'll get to is like some of the points I've made before. Like, I can do this without AI. I've always been able to do this. Like I don't need AI to tell me my top 5 sales opportunities, let's say, for example. Someone will shred me for this and go, oh, Ryan, it can do all this magical things around what the best deals look like and all the characteristics you don't even know about. True story, right? But just as an example to pick on, I can write a structured query to get that. And so I think in a lot of the places where you'd say this process needs to be deterministic, you're ultimately going to say, I don't need AI. I don't need that creativity. I don't need that imagineering around this. And then there'll be other spaces where I do, right? And our example of reviewing the resumes is a perfect example of that, where like, look, I know that's not deterministic in its evaluation, but like, that's okay for that, right? Like, there isn't a structured way to do. Maybe some interviewing HR specialists would tell me different, but like, I've yet to find the perfect structured way to do that, right? And I've read so many books on the topic, it's not funny. Like, how do you select and hire, blah 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 blah? And statistics tell us, even with the best efforts, we've still got pretty poor outcomes on that front, right? So it's like, so now that's a great application of the technology and it helps me go faster and it helps me be more creative around it. So I think that's where we're going to get to. It's like, but so this is an interesting point for both the vendors and the consumers of this. Don't just use it for the sake of it. So sort of don't use it as a cop out, right? I'm not really sure what to do here. I don't know, chuck in a chat GPT action. That's a bit of a cop out, right? Be intentional about the use of it. Be intentional about the application. Like, this is a good place for me to put it to work. This over here, I don't need it. It's not adding any particular value, right? And I think, again, for you guys building the product, you have to look at it the exact same way as well. Like, can I help bring more people to the fold? Can I help build more apps faster? Can I help build apps that could never have been built before? Can I solve problems that could never have been solved before? Like, you've got to ask those questions and not just blindly use the technology.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. Now, to wrap the whole thing up, I want to ask, how would you summarize it? And also, in your summary, if you can include the future trends and predictions that you're seeing. I know you referenced them a few times throughout the conversation, but you know, Yeah, the stage is yours. If you want to summarize it, and also in your summary, tell me about what your future predictions around usage of AI or in low code, no code, both vendors and users. How do you see the trends? Where are we going to be?
Yeah. I think the summary is I mean, I'm bullish on the technology, right? And I think, naysayers, I think will certainly be proven wrong along the way, right? Now, like none of us can predict, is this 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years? How does this stuff play out, right? So I'm bullish on it. And because of that, I think everybody needs to be playing, experimenting, figuring out what's possible, talking openly with others, right? Like there's a great space. Even take the vendors out of it for a moment, because getting vendors to talk to one another about future plans is hard work. But on the customer front, right? Like what are you using? What are you using it for? How's it working? And do that on a domain level, right? Get your HR people together with HR people in other companies, your product people together with other product
Mm,
people. How are you using this stuff? How are you benefiting from it? What problems have you seen? So I think super bullish on it for one thing. I think people need to play, experiment, learn what's possible, have an open mind, talk to others about it. And you'll see, like more and more people will publish more and more information to help you with this. Talk to ChatGPT and ask it questions about this, because it's really good at that kind of thing, right? You can chuck in your AirPods, you can hit the talk mode, and you can have a conversation with it when you're going out for your evening walk with your dog or something like that. So that's the first part of it, right? The next part of it comes down to the conversation we just had about governance and management, which is like, okay, you need to be smart, you need to be safe here. So this isn't like the iron fist of thou shalt not use it in this company. It's a lot of companies have come out with their statements about you can't be putting your stuff in there because they're stealing our data and things. So you have to think about that stuff, and you have to think about, like, where are the places I care, where are the places I don't care. Um, this stuff's moving so fast. Fine, run a local model versus leveraging a cloud model. Which vendors do I trust? Like, you're going to have to place some bets on which vendors you trust, which ones you don't trust. You're going to have some use cases where you'd say, I'm not willing to use it for that. Some data where you would say, I'm not willing to put that data in there. So again, governance management, and that's not necessarily technically enforced governance and management. It's like policy, best practices, training, education, all that kind of thing. So that's sort of state of play as far as I'm concerned. Look at what all the vendors are doing, keep abreast of what all the vendors are doing. They're all giving you good examples and use cases and scenarios, that type of thing. So there's a lot of things happening out there, a lot of industry luminaries pontificating about it. Consume that content, right? Where's the future go? Um, Super interesting. I can see a future where, and so this will get to the conversation when people said, does AI mean low code's dead? Absolutely. I think that's an absurd conversation brought about by people who don't understand what low code's actually all about, and the fact you need frameworks and management, all the kind of stuff we've talked about, right? But like, I can see a world where today what happens is, again, you say, I'd like an app that does something, and it's taking your declarative model as a low code vendor and executing it in your current engine. If I fast forward 10 years, I can see a world where, literally, I say, I need to solve this business problem. And out of that manifests some set of technology. Maybe we'll call it an app. Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be voice. Maybe it'll be typing and mouse. Who knows, right? But something will be generated that's unique, that's dynamic, but that's consistent in terms of its experience, so that people can understand it. And then from a low code vendor perspective, it's not necessarily running in as structured and controlled and declarative a ways as it is today, right? So now it's potentially more flexible, scalable, and portable. So I can imagine, a world where we would say, hey, I'm in Zenphi and I want to solve this business problem. And Zenphi's going to go and crank out, using this kind of technology, a bunch of code. It's going to say, hey, the best place to run this part's in Azure, best place to run that part's in Google. Actually, there's a spot right in AWS right now. I'm going to move this compute workload over to there, and I'm going to handle all that invisibly in the background for you in a secure way, Mrs. Customer, right? And so I kind of looked at that world, because for the longest time, one of the constraints and probably complaints from the pro dev land about low code platforms is they are declarative, which means there are limitations around what we can do. And we create these places where you can break out, right? Call a web service, run some code, whatever it happens to be. But largely, we've got a set of features and functions that are kind of fixed in scope, right? As an industry, it's not picking on any one vendor. It's how low code technology works. So I can see a world where we can potentially, as low code vendors, break that glass ceiling, right? Where the apps that can be built in our platform can potentially go beyond what we ever envisaged within a certain framework instead of rules around how they run and how they're secured and bits and pieces like that. Um, that's kind of where I think things get super interesting. But that's probably one I'd put, come back and ask me in 10 years, was I right or was I wrong? I don't think that's this year, next year, or 3 years from now. Probably if you and I can dream it up, someone's in a garage right now working on it, right? Don't give away any of your secrets. Maybe you are too. But that world, like I think that's out there somewhere. I just don't know when.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, we'll see. Hopefully, we'll live in that till then, and we'll see where we land. And hopefully, we can
I
help
hope
shape.
so.
Hopefully,
I
we
hope it
can.
comes fast enough that I'm still
Yeah.
around.
Hopefully, we can help shaping it as well.
Mhm.
Ryan, really was a fascinating conversation as always. Really enjoyed the time, the conversation. There's hopefully there are list the people who are watching the webinar have also a lot of takeaways from the webinar. Um, Again, just wanted to thank you for your time. And yeah, we are. Is there anything else you wanted to call out, cover before we say goodbye to everyone?
It's it's a pleasure having a discussion. This is how great things happen, right? Ideation happens when people talk and people explore the art of the possible. If anyone's got any perspectives they want to share, reach out. You can find me. LinkedIn's primarily where I'm hanging out these days, and feel free to reach out if you want to have a conversation. Obviously, I'm out there as a freelancer at the moment, so I'm more than happy to help people out in on their journey in this regard. And through analysis.tech as well, we've got a whole set of folks who are super smart and accomplished in this space who can help folks on the journey. And so I love to have people reach out in that regard. And obviously, as I say, I'm an investor in Zenphi, and I think as a company, you and Aaron have done some phenomenal things. And so I think, the more people can come check out what's possible there, take a look at that holistic approach. I think it's something you and I, we talked right about at the start. Is it data? Is it forms? Is it process? Well, actually, Zenphi, our goal's always been to do it all, right? And so I encourage people to take a look at the platform too, and sort of see what it's like to experience all those things thought about in a holistic way that I think as an industry, everyone's kind of come at it from their own particular angle and maybe stronger in one place, weaker in another. So, come check out Zenphi and see what it's like to have, something that does it all, kind of in a holistic way.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Ryan. And yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, the recording will be available soon. Fortunately, we don't have time for any Q&A, but feel free. We put a link to Ryan's profile in the webinar on the webinar page, so feel free to reach out to Ryan directly or reach out to us if you've got any questions. Thank you very much, and have
Awesome.
a great day. Thank you.
You too. Take care.